They threw a great party to welcome their new member, Lloyd. The celebration started with a cheer, and the host announced that it was his treat, so Lloyd could eat and drink as much as he wanted. As the host started drinking, he noticed Lloyd just staring at his drink and asked if he didn't want to drink or if he just wasn't good at handling beer. Lloyd admitted that he wasn't really good at drinking beer. Silica then offered him some juice, saying it was perfectly fine to drink that instead, mentioning she also preferred juice, since she wasn't good with alcohol either. Lloyd explained that it wasn't that he couldn't drink alcohol, but it was a bit traumatic for him. The host immediately asked what kind of trauma he had with drinking, only to be reminded by another member that it was rude to ask something so personal so casually. Lloyd began to share his story, explaining that 2 years ago, his master held a celebration because Lloyd had reached the legal drinking age. His master brought a massive amount of drinks, more than enough for the two of them. They started drinking, and his master kept pushing Lloyd to drink more. By the end of the night, Lloyd had consumed around 20 bottles. The hangover he experienced the next day was absolute torture, and he could never forget how much he suffered. Hearing his traumatic tale, the others found it quite unique. Someone then asked Lloyd what kind of person his master was. Cross showed interest too, and Silica wondered if his master was also a white mage. Lloyd clarified that his master wasn't a white mage but more of an attack mage, recalling his master's massive magic explosions. Silica was impressed that his master could teach support magic even though he wasn't a white mage, and could use support magic better than Lloyd himself. Silica wondered what it would be like to learn from such a master. Lloyd quickly interrupted her thoughts, explaining that the only lesson his master taught was pain, as he shivered remembering those nightmares. Understanding how tough it must have been for Lloyd, the host then announced it was time for a strategy meeting. He admitted he wasn't great at explaining things, so he asked Dugas to take over. Dugas smiled, saying as their leader, he should indeed be better at such things, and he began to explain the strategy to everyone. He informed everyone that the mission was to take down a group of high-level wolves that were destroying farmlands. Hearing the mention of high-level wolves, Lloyd recalled that they usually lived in packs in the forest and hunted monsters and other creatures to survive. Lloyd asked what crops were being targeted, and Silica answered that it was just vegetables, not livestock or anything else. High-level wolves are carnivores, and Lloyd had never heard of them destroying farms. The host explained that the difficulty of this quest had increased because of the sheer number of wolves appearing. There were so many that it was hard to give an exact count, but he said it was a large number. If the numbers were too overwhelming, they would have to rely on Silica's magic. Silica said she would do whatever she could, but using area of effect spells consumed a lot of mana. This meant that if there were too many enemies, the difficulty level would be even higher. Thinking they needed something more, the host then asked Lloyd if he could use offensive magic. He told them he could use offensive magic, but it wasn't very effective since white mages don't have as much firepower as professional mages. Hearing this, they decided to focus on supporting Silica. Silica felt happy, but a bit nervous, asking them not to expect too much from her. They reassured her to be more confident. Cross mentioned he preferred someone humble like Lloyd over those who flaunt their power. Doug then explained their strategy. He and the leader would distract the enemies and gather them in one place. Then Silica would attack with her offensive magic. Cross asked about his role, and Doug said Cross would protect Silica and Lloyd. Lastly, Lloyd's job was to provide support and healing during the battle. Lloyd understood the plan, and they agreed to adjust it if needed once they arrived. After discussing the strategy, they returned to celebrating. The leader raised his drink, encouraging everyone to enjoy themselves. However, Doug stopped him, saying he had enough to drink for the night, since they had an important mission the next day. The leader protested, wanting more drinks, but Doug insisted. Lloyd felt grateful to have met such good friends. As they left the tavern, he asked Doug where they should meet the next day. Doug asked if Lloyd wouldn't stay with them, and Lloyd hesitated, saying he couldn't. Understanding, Doug handed him a pouch of money for his expenses. Lloyd tried to refuse, but Doug insisted, saying he'd deduct it from Lloyd's reward later. Lloyd accepted, feeling thankful for the help. The next morning, Lloyd was ready to repay the kindness. Meanwhile, Alan struggled in a battle, shocked by how strong the golems had become. He couldn't believe his group was having such difficulty. Ruru and Mia were also finding it much harder than before, realizing something was off. They remembered when golems were easy to defeat, but now they were struggling. Alan, determined to uphold his title as a hero, attacked the golem with his sword, pointing it at the creature in frustration. Because he didn't want to fail as a hero, Alan launched a desperate attack on the golem, landing a critical hit. He felt a surge of happiness seeing it finally work. But then he noticed something behind the golem. It was a wolf. Before he could react, the wolf bypassed him, heading straight for the other party members. Alan frantically tried to warn them, as the wolf targeted Lena. Alan shouted a warning and then moved to protect her. He placed his arm in the wolf's path, thinking his armed guard would be enough to handle the situation like before. However, to everyone's shock, the wolf bit through his arm completely. His guard was no match for the wolf's bite, and in the next moment, Alan saw the wolf standing there, holding his severed arm in its mouth. Alan ran to Lena, telling her to stop messing around. He hugged her tightly and called for Sheena to heal her so they wouldn't lose her. Sheena quickly started casting her healing magic. As she worked, Lena thought they would be fine with Sheena's help. But suddenly, Sheena stopped healing, realizing that Lena's arm wasn't regenerating, even with her spell. Lena lay there in pain, and Alan and Mia could see how dire the situation was. Seeing the threat to their lives, Ruru suggested they retreat immediately. Alan didn't want to leave Lena behind, but knowing they had no other choice, he reluctantly agreed, and they all fled. News quickly spread across the kingdom that Alan and his team had failed their quest and left without reporting back to the guild. Meanwhile, the next morning, you and the others gathered outside the inn as planned. After exchanging greetings, you asked Lloyd if he could do something about their heavy luggage. Lloyd agreed and used his storage magic, much to everyone's relief. They no longer had to carry heavy bags and could reach their destination faster. Lloyd told them that storage magic wasn't uncommon and offered to teach them how to use it. Everyone was surprised and excited by the idea. Lloyd explained that it would take at least an hour to learn the basics and more time to increase their storage capacity. Cross mentioned that being able to carry more arrows with storage magic would be incredibly helpful. Lloyd's willingness to assist and teach them made everyone grateful to have him around. He stated that they needed to head to the plantation immediately. This marked the beginning of Lloyd's first adventure with his new party members, who had been nothing but kind to him, something he wasn't used to in his life. On their journey, they set up camp to rest after traveling a long distance. Silica and Cross were happy they reached the campsite earlier than planned, and they felt relieved not to have to carry their heavy gear anymore. All they needed to do now was light a fire. You called out to Dugas, telling him you saw a river earlier and wanted to go bathe with Silica. Dugas understood and said it wouldn't be a problem. They would handle the rest. Cross decided to stay at the camp, while Dugas and Elle took responsibility for gathering firewood. Dugas handed them flare guns in case they needed help urgently. With the preparations done, Lloyd headed into the forest to gather supplies. As he walked around, he collected enough firewood but noticed there was still space left in his storage. He thought about gathering some extra items that might be useful later. While exploring, he spotted an orange tree right at the edge of a small riverbank. The oranges reminded him of the sweet, nutritious fruits from his master's home. He thought it would be great to pick enough for everyone. Climbing the tree, he carefully started collecting the oranges. However, as he reached out for more, he stepped on a weak branch, causing it to snap and sending him tumbling down. As Lloyd tumbled down from the tree, he splashed into the river below. Emerging from the water, he realized he had interrupted you and Silica, who were bathing at that very spot. Startled and angry, you both demanded to know what he was doing. Lloyd quickly tried to explain that it was an accident and apologized profusely, wishing he had fallen onto solid ground instead. Despite his explanation, you weren't satisfied and called him a pervert, landing a punch on him. After a while, the three of you returned to camp. Dugas and Cross noticed Lloyd took much longer than expected and remarked on his tardiness, jokingly pointing out that he also brought two unexpected guests back with him. Lloyd apologized for the delay, mentioning that he got caught up in conversation with you and Silica on the way back. While his excuse seemed flimsy, you and Silica stepped in to give a proper explanation, describing the mishap at the river and helping to smooth things over. Grateful for your understanding and for avoiding a bigger commotion, Lloyd felt relieved. With everything set up, including the campfire, there was only one thing left to do. As night fell, it was time to decide who would keep watch. Lloyd suggested taking turns in pairs, and you volunteered to take the first shift with him. Lloyd agreed, though he secretly wondered if you wanted to keep an eye on him after the earlier mishap. He nervously assured you that he would do his best. During the watch, you remarked how strange it was that they hadn't encountered any monsters yet. Noticing you lost in thought, Lloyd asked if something was bothering you. After a moment of hesitation, you opened up, apologizing for dragging him into such a dangerous quest. Lloyd reassured you that he was glad to be part of the team and appreciated the work. You then shared why this quest mattered so much to you. It reminded you of your childhood village, which was destroyed by monsters. In the chaos, you lost your parents and everyone else you knew, making you the sole survivor. The people who rescued you promised you would be safe, which is why you couldn't ignore any requests involving monster attacks. You also worried that if the farm was destroyed, it would cause food shortages in nearby villages. Lloyd listened attentively, realizing how compassionate you were. Just then, you sensed something in the distance. You moved ahead to investigate and found a monster called Polar. Recognizing it as a formidable foe, you braced for a tough battle, knowing it would be a challenge for just the two of you. Huey urgently told Lloyd to call for backup while she held off the monsters. Lloyd agreed, but to their surprise, the monsters turned and walked away without any sign of aggression. They couldn't understand what had just happened. You speculated that there might be a larger monster nearby scaring them off, but Huey assured you that wasn't the case since she didn't sense any danger around. Despite her reassurances, Huey noted that something felt off about the forest. After a few days of travel, you mentioned that it was strange they hadn't encountered any monsters, even though the quest indicated there should be some. Dugas asked Lloyd if he had done anything to repel the monsters, but Lloyd said he only occasionally used his detection magic, which wasn't designed to scare off monsters. You all agreed the situation was unusual. Lloyd decided to expand his detection range and scan the forest more thoroughly. His expression changed, prompting everyone to ask if something was wrong. Lloyd explained that he detected a large gathering of monsters about 10 kilometers ahead, near their destination. Everyone was shocked, realizing the monsters were exactly where they were headed. You told everyone to hold on and focus on how Lloyd could detect things 10 kilometers away. He confirmed that his detection range was indeed that far, which he thought was normal. This amazed the group, who asked if this meant he could sense everything in the forest. Lloyd affirmed this, wondering if he said something wrong. You started sweating in surprise, and Dugas told him to get used to their amazement. They thought they had seen all of Lloyd's abilities, but he kept surprising them. Knowing the location of the monsters, they continued to the client's plantation. Upon arrival, they were shocked to see a massive horde of monsters gathered together, too many to handle in a fight. Lloyd remarked how strange it was to see so many monsters in one place. And you agreed. He pondered aloud, saying this was the only place his detection magic indicated monsters, which was unusual. Silica agreed, noting it was odd for all the monsters in the forest to vanish, including the high wolves mentioned in the quest. Cross chimed in, saying it seemed unreal because there were no signs of a struggle in the forest, suggesting the other monsters might have been scared away. Lloyd asked you where the plantation owner was, and you replied that he believed the owner was injured and staying at his son's house. Lloyd thought having some clues about what happened might help him. Then, you noticed something unusual ahead and asked Lloyd to check it out. As an archer, you could see far, but Lloyd couldn't see as far without help. Cross mentioned seeing a strange black stone among the monsters. To get a better look, Lloyd used a body enhancement spell to improve his vision. Now he could see the black stone surrounded by monsters. He told you about it, and you asked if you could see it too. Lloyd used the same spell on you, and you saw the stone as well. It looked odd, and Lloyd recognized it might be radiating mana. Lloyd realized the stone was emitting beastmen mana, something his master had mentioned. Some beastmen could use rare magic to control monsters. If this was the case, they were in serious trouble. Just then, Lloyd sensed a group of monsters heading their way. Cross wondered where they had been hiding, and Lloyd admitted he hadn't detected them until now. Lloyd concluded that the sudden appearance of so many high-level monsters meant someone was strategically leading them into a trap. They were likely up against a powerful beastman who could control monsters, making their situation much more dangerous.